The UK ghost village where time has stood still since 1943. What caused the population to leave in such haste? Mantelpiece clock. Tyneham is a small village nestled in the valley of the Purbeck Hills in Dorset, England. Once upon a time, it was a small but active village with a long history dating back to the Roman occupation. With a church, school building, post office, rectory, farms, a mansion house, and many cottages, it was the quintessential British chocolate box village. But life in Tyneham would come to a standstill in 1943 when it was requisitioned for army use. It has been a ghost village ever since. Despite there being no running water or electricity, villagers were able to live contentedly in the idyllic setting where generations of families had built a life over the centuries. When the 1940s arrived, the war raging across the world seemed distant. But shortly before Christmas in 1943, the lives of the 225 villagers were to change beyond recognition when they were informed that their village was to be requisitioned by the War Office in just over a month. WW2 had landed on their doorstep. With its close proximity to the Loworth firing ranges, the surrounding land of Tyneham was considered a perfect training ground for the tanks of the Allied forces in preparation for the D-Day preparations. An official letter read, "The government appreciate that this is no small sacrifice which you are asked to make, but they are sure that you will give this further help towards winning the war with a good heart." Promised that they would be able to return to their homes when the war ended, the villagers reluctantly packed a few belongings and said a temporary farewell to their homes. The final villagers to leave pinned a poignant note to the door of the church, but the promise was never kept. When the war finally ended in 1945, locals were left surprised that the heavy military presence in the area remained. During a public inquiry, the military put forward the argument that they still required the land for trading. Then, in 1948, the post-war government allowed the army to place a compulsory purchase order on the land. For over 300 years, the estate, which spanned the village, had been owned by the Bond family. With most houses tied to the estate, the Bond family would receive £30,000 in compensation. For most of the villagers, however, who were tenants of the land-owning family, the compensation granted was for no more than the vegetables they had been growing in their gardens. Over the years, villagers would make frequent appeals for the return of their village. In 1974, a man named John Good wrote a letter to Prime Minister Harold Wilson requesting the right to return home. "Tyneham to me is the most beautiful place in the world, and I want to give the rest of my life and energy to its restoration. Most of all, I want to go home." Over the years, villagers would make frequent appeals for the return of their village. In 1974, a man named John Good wrote a letter to Prime Minister Harold Wilson requesting the right to return home. "Tyneham to me is the most beautiful place in the world, and I want to give the rest of my life and energy to its restoration. Most of all, I want to go home." The villagers never did get to return permanently, but in 1975 the Ministry of Defense began opening the village to visitors at weekends. By then, many of the buildings had been reclaimed by nature, whilst others had suffered damage from shelling. To this day, Tyneham remains under military control, but the church and schoolhouse are now museums, giving a little bit of life back to the village that was so graciously abandoned.